We're delighted that you all are here. This is the 60th annual Barton-Clinton-Gordey Lecture Series. Amazing record. When I was talking to Rabbi Zedek and telling him about some of the other rabbis we had, he knew them all, friends with them. He has led a dynamic and distinguished ministry over several decades, not only here in the United States, but has spoken around the world in different settings. I'm sure we'll hear some of that as we go along. He is a great storyteller and scholar. He's done a lot of interfaith work. He's led two of the great congregations in Judaism in the United States, one in the Kansas City area, one in the Chicago area. Also did interfaith work and worked with the Jewish Federation in Cincinnati, Ohio for 4 years. He continues to be active as an advisor to the rabbis organization here in the United States. And he's also now rabbi in residence, teaching at St. Paul School of Theology, which is our United Methodist Seminary that has campuses in Kansas City where he's living, and also a campus at our United Methodist University, Oklahoma City University in Oklahoma City. We are delighted to have him here with us. He's going to be working on some problematic texts, as he calls them, this morning, and giving us some rabbinical insight, and also giving you a chance to delve in and have some discussion at tables and discussion back and forth. Let's have a quick prayer, and then we'll turn it over to Rabbi Michael Zedek. Let us pray. Oh, great and gracious God, we give you thanks for another day of life. We especially enjoy being able to come here this morning and join this fellowship with others, being able to share this fellowship with the rabbi. We pray your blessings upon him, O Lord, and all of us who have gathered here. Help us keep open hearts and minds so that we might hear you speaking to us this morning. Let all the people say, Amen. Amen.
Thank you. We just shared a little secret. Is it David or Reverend Wiggs in this conference? So, Reverend Wiggs, David, it was wonderful to hear those kind words. In fact, every person who, am I too loud? No? Every person who does the kind of work that you and I are privileged to be blessed to encounter and grow in has moments where they receive an introduction. And so every speaker has some responses to the introduction. Here are two that I've used, and you are welcome to take them without attribution. One, of all the introductions I've ever received, that's the most recent. Two, that was the most uplifting introduction I've ever received, with the one exception of when the person who was to introduce me didn't show up and I had to introduce myself. Now, the truth of the matter is, of course, that every speaker really does introduce him or herself. The issue of the initial introduction is to suspend your disbelief about whether or not you're going to bother to listen to what they have to say, right? So my hope quite clearly is that I'll have something worth your listening to, and that in our wrestling together, which is a wonderful metaphor for what it is in Jewish tradition to engage with the text, will be worthwhile in our individual and collective growth as persons and as a community of, very awkward word, faith. We'll see what happens as we work together. I'm informed that there is the desire to do some work at table and also some frontal stuff. We're going to try to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I'll start off with some pieces of learning that begin, as you'll probably get tired of hearing me say, with a story. This is a true story. Do any of you know the name Dr. Fred Craddock? Gee, just a few of you. Was he here?
He's spoken in this series.
One of the truly great pulpit presence in American religious life ever. He's missed. He tells a story about his first trip to Israel, in which a guy, any of you have been to Israel? So you have the best guide ever, right? Every single person who goes to Israel thinks their guide is the single best guide. Now, part of the reason for that is it's a very difficult course to qualify, so they have incredible skills. So the guide was saying, such and such a miracle happened here. Craddock immediately responded with, "I hope you don't mind if I have a different understanding." And without missing a beat, the guide said, quote, "Of course not. You can be sure if there's only one way to understand something, it didn't come from God." Now we're going to be, I hope, all of us open to that prospect, because it captures beautifully a particular approach that Jewish tradition has loved from its beginning of wrestling with text to this day. It's captured in two Hebrew words. You ready?
Yep.
Can you pretend you can see that? Devar acher. Devar means literally a word or a thing, another interpretation. Not my right and your wrong one, but another one. We've always understood that these texts are multivalent. They exist on multiple levels. In fact, now here's one that for folks who understand themselves to be literalists or fundamentalists is sort of heretical. Jewish tradition insists that to only understand a text literally is to miss the meanings in it. Now notice there was a plural there, the meanings in it. The text always has more than one way to enter our lives for us to respond to. And that leads to another aside, but not this time in the form of a story. I am always awestruck by occasions when returning to what we'll use the English term, the lectionary of our tradition every year, I find this particular insight in the text. Text hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is my awareness, my presence to the nuances that are already there. So Devar acher, another interpretation, not my right and your wrong one, another one. Should be intellectually defensible, but the prospect of pretending I erased that. The other preliminary is my tradition has always understood that every text exists on a minimum of 4 levels. It's a very cute little acronym. So for those of you whose Hebrew's rusty, I promise to translate. The 4 levels are P. I'm trying to do it into English. R, D, S. Now, some of you know, Hebrew does not have vowels. Vowel signs are added later to Hebrew. So, this is understood to be the word par-des, the vowels. By the way, does it sound like any English word, par-des?
Paradise.
It's the origin of the word paradise in English. Now, in Hebrew, it means orchard, as in a place where there are multiple of nourishing foods available. But the 4 levels that, at minimum, every biblical text is understood to exist at. Peshat, I promise I'll translate, which means literal. Sea split, they walk through on dry ground. Remez, hint or clue. That is to say, if you use the critical faculties that you would use on any other document, any other concern in your life, and you apply them to the Hebrew Bible, you might also come up with some new way of looking at it. For instance, the text says, everybody agrees, my fingers are never going to leave my hand. The sea split and they walk through on dry ground, right? Shouldn't there be mud? No, of course. Which would be a hint or clue that something funny is going on here. 3rd level, drosh. It's the current word for a sermon, by the way, a tedious moral homily. That's Webster's dictionary. But it also means the ethical meaning, the lesson. What does the story teach me about me, or us about what it is to be a community? Easy, quick example. How is it that with every miracle in the Hebrew Bible, I'm going to be talking about this in one of the presentations later in much greater detail, no one ever draws the correct lesson. There's no exception to that. Every time there's a miracle in the Hebrew Bible, nobody gets it. which must be the lesson. Last level, sod. It's the Hebrew word for secret. Secret meaning, the nuance meaning, the meaning that might be dangerous if somebody naive were to know. Can't tell you, you're too young. Okay, that's the background. Now let's get to some foreground. And what I'd like to do is unpack a specific text with you and then give you another option for some table discussion of that same kind of unpacking, and then we'll come together with what, where, what, etc. Make sense? I'm glad it makes sense to you. It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at Cain and Abel. And what I'd love for, that's chapter 4, verse 1. This is after the what we call the so-called expulsion. And I'm going to read the JPS translation, and occasionally, because every translation is an interpretation, and the nuances might lead in another direction, I'll play with that as well. But here we go, Cain and Abel. The man now was intimate with his wife. She became pregnant and gave birth to Cain, saying, both I and the Eternal have made better than man, because as you may know, Hebrew has no neuter. A person, a human being. So, they had physical intimacy, and Eve gives birth. She names the child Cain in Hebrew. Ki kaniti ish im Elohim. That's what the Hebrew said, that they translated, because I made a man, I made a person with God. Aside. First statement in the Hebrew Bible that is a theological statement put in the mouth of a human being. And it's from the woman. I don't think that's inconsequential, at least not for me as the father of daughters. I have made a human being with God. There's something wondrous about that, and those of you who've had the privilege of giving birth to a healthy child know there's something astonishing, overwhelming in that miracle. So, she then gets pregnant again. She then continued giving birth to his brother Abel. Abel became a shepherd while Cain tilled the soil. Now, many scholars have commented on biblical economy of style. There's hardly any wasted words, and in fact, for rabbinic tradition, there are no wasted words. If something appears to be unnecessary, it's loaded with alternative meanings. But we know she named him Cain, ki kaniti. You hear the accents? In English, we say Cain, because I made or acquired. Cain kaniti. Everybody hears it, yes? In Hebrew, Abel's name is Hevel. But anybody notice there's something missing in the parallelism? Wouldn't we expect she named him Hevel because, since she named him Cain because, right? It's not there. Why? Well, I'll tell you. If you promise to be forgiving. Hevel, in Hebrew, means puff of wind, or worse, a toot, and I don't mean from your mouth. It's the refrain in Ecclesiastes, Hevel Havelim, which is translated vanity of vanities. Now, let me put it this way. In Jewish tradition, giving a child a name is a big deal. There are sometimes family arguments about what's going to be the name of this child. It's probably not likely that you really want to name a child Toot, puff of wind. I mean, it's almost a dead giveaway. Watch out, something funny's going on here, because how could you literally name a child that? And then on top of that, the economy of language, nothing about what schools they went to. We find out right away they're working. One of them is a farmer, and one of them is a rancher. Well, I mean, I'm using contemporary terms. I'm in Oklahoma, after all. So, what do we got? Geez, I started Oklahoma. All the farmers and the ranchers shall be friends. What's the big deal about that song? Seriously, now, first question where you've got to work for breakfast. The farmers and the ranchers shall be friends. What's the big deal? Say again. They have different conflicting economic interests. Isn't that peculiar that the Bible would pick that up right away as something that's essential to this story? Farmers need fences. Ranchers need lots of land under rolling skies above. Don't fence me in. Thank you very much. Now, hard question. What's the older profession, farming or ranching? How many say farming? How many say ranching? The ranchers get extra food today. The Bedouin experience is the earlier experience in the evolution of human beings. Wandering from food source to food source, water hole to water hole, agriculture begins the revolution that leads to you and me. Approximately 10,000 or so years ago, the quote-unquote secret of the seed was unlocked, and it became not only possible, necessary to settle down. You could have a reliable food source, etc., etc. Okay, back to the story. One day, in the course of time, Cain brought some of his harvest as an offering to the Eternal, and Abel too brought an offering from among the choice lambs of his flock and their fattest parts. The Eternal approved Abel and his offering, but did not approve Cain and his offering. Cain was filled with rage, his face fell. Okay. How do they know to bring an offering? Where do they bring an offering? Text doesn't seem to care at all, right? Both of them bring, and one seems to be, how do they know? Accepted, the other not accepted. And my favorite line, his face fell. No, plastic surgery not yet having been invented is a problem, but the text stands as it is. His face fell. The Eternal One then said to Cain, this is one of the most critical lines in the Hebrew Bible. Why are you so angry? Why is your face fallen? Would you not do well to lift it? For if you do not well, sin is a demon at the door. You are the one it craves, and yet you can govern it. In short, we all live on slippery slopes. And a slippery slope of good deed means, oh, we'll do more. A slippery slope of, I might just cheat a little, makes it easier to cheat the next time and the next time and the next time. But what's remarkable is, in effect, not unlike many of the prophets, they put in God's mouth. Notice I didn't say God said. I don't know what God says. I know what the text tells me, right? They put in God's mouth something like the following. What's the big deal about the ritual? The critical thing is who and what you are in terms of what you do. Your behavior is what matters. That's the critical business of being a human being. Isn't that what it says? By the way, if anybody thinks, whoa, he's going too far afield, you stop me, or try to at least. Okay. Cain now thought about his brother Abel. What an awful translation that was. Cain said to his brother Abel. Now, does anybody have what they said?
Let us go out to the field.
Really? Is that what it, with quotation marks around it?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody got just simply an ellipsis? That's a fancy schmancy English word for 3 dots? No. Okay, so you got the Hebrew Bible translation. Let us go out into the field is added via the Septuagint. It's not in the original Hebrew. Because the Hebrew says, Cain now said to his brother Abel. But it doesn't say what they said. The next thing is even more critical. By the way, Midrash. How many of you are familiar with that term? Good. Midrash in rabbinic tradition is what... The sages didn't have TV, so they had a love affair with the text. And they turned it over and over and over again, as they said, for everything to be found in it. And Midrash is sometimes understood as filling in the space between the words. sometimes filling in the space between the letters. So here's an easy, I think, somewhat tongue-in-cheek definition. The historian says, it happened, I can prove it. The theologian says, it happened, I can't prove it, I believe it. The student of Midrash says, it didn't happen, but I can make it happen. So the Midrash invents endless numbers of things they talked about, that they argued about. But what's more vital than that is what happens next. Then when they were in the field, Cain turned on his brother Abel and killed him. So, the first act of violence recorded in the text, right? How many of you are familiar with Stanley Kubrick's classic movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey? Okay, a lot of you. So, forgive this acting job. If you recall, the film starts in a prehistoric moment in the wilderness definition, a barren place, as opposed to wilderness, a lush place. This proto-human type character is walking somewhere, comes across a pile of bones, and there's not much to do, so scattering the bones, and his hand, isn't it, I think, his hand, well, because violence is about to happen, and that's more commonly associated with male, right? His hand comes across the jawbone. Now, jawbone is shaped much like a scythe, and it's also the strongest bone in the human body. He picks up the bone, and he goes on the other bones, and they scatter. Hits it, does it again, scatter. Again and again and again. Human beings have become tool makers. Da-da-da-da-da. Next scene, water hole, where two proto-human type groups are going through the ritual of who's going to get to use the water hole. Back and forth, right? Until they're right next to each other. Can you imagine how bad the breath must have been? And one of them doesn't know that this guy's got the jawbone. And boom! 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 Over and over again. Long after the point is that it's necessary, first act of violence. In triumph, the proto-human throws the jawbone up into the air. It rotates, 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 slow motion. And the next thing is the spaceship going to the moon. What's the point? The human adventure that we call civilization began with violence. By the way, the word civilization comes from the Latin for city. Cities have always been, and I dare say, I'm frightened to admit, may always be places where there is violence as part of the story, always. Back to the text. So we've got the first murder. Now we have the trial. Then the Eternal One said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Presumably a rhetorical question, correct? And he replied, "How should I know? Am I my brother's keeper?" One of the most famous lines in the text, because the answer is supposed to be, not only you're supposed to be your brother's brother. And God said, "What have you done? Your brother's blood is shrinking to me from the ground." So we've had the indictment, and now we've got the trial. What have you done? What's the verdict? Guilty. Now, those of you who are very familiar with the Hebrew Bible know what's the punishment in the text for murder? Oh, come on.
Mark of Kane.
Hmm?
The Mark of Kane.
No. In general, what's the punishment? Death. Death. I mean, you're in a state that does that, right? Yeah. God, in the text, is going to be a pinko commie liberal judge, and he's going to let Cain off, sort of, right? Because what is the punishment? Because we got the verdict, now we get the verdict, the punishment. Verse 11, "Now you are cursed by this very soul which has opened his mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hands. When you till the soil, no longer shall it give you its yield." That's the first part. The second part, you shall become a rootless wanderer, or ceaseless wanderer on the earth. Okay. So two elements to the punishment. One, farming is going to be hard work. Still true, isn't it? Always was, always will be. Hard work. clear as day, accurate statement. Second part, you'll be a ceaseless wanderer on the earth. We're going to look more closely at that one in a moment. Because now finally, Cain opens his mouth. Cain then said to the Eternal One, by the way, this is the first time in the Hebrew text that Cain says anything, as opposed to the 3 dots. My punishment is too heavy to bear. Seeing as now you've expelled me from the face of the soil, and I must hide from your face, I have become a rootless wanderer in the earth, and anyone who finds me might kill me. Wow. Compared to his mother's theological statement, Cain seemed to think God is located in one unique place. You've exiled me from your presence. Huh? Where'd you come up with that idea, buddy? And I have become a rootless wanderer on the earth. Anyone who finds me or meets me, in the Hebrew more precisely, may kill me. Now wait a second. I've read the text. There's Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and now there's no more Abel. Who's going to meet him? Precisely. The text knows that it's presenting a mythic construction of reality, not just about then, but right now, about you and me. Because otherwise it makes no sense. How in the world could he be worried about there being other people? Unless the text understands there are other people. It gets worse. Look at the next sentence. Not so, said the Eternal One. Should anyone kill Cain, he would be avenged sevenfold. Even God hasn't read the story. God even thinks there are other people. Maybe that's likely. But here's where it gets even more deep. And the Eternal gave Cain a sign that none who came upon him would kill him. Now, anybody know what the so-called Mark of Kane is? You mentioned it, Judy. Do you have an idea?
You know, we've never been told. It's not in there. So we've assumed some things. We've assumed.
What have you
we've
assumed?
assumed color.
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 Oh.
I've heard that.
Oh, that's one I haven't heard. Thank you.
Oh, yes, that's where we got African folk from. That's an interpretation I heard as a
Yeah,
child.
I honestly believe you. Get out. Usually those who use the Bible to suggest that go with the Ham story, Noah and Ham, but that's fascinating. Anybody else? The Mark of Kane?
You think of it as visible, something visible that you see.
If, for those of you who remember the movie The Bible, awful movie. The director has, and then all of a sudden there's this hideous scarring of his face so that people stay away from him, right? Now, I'm going to tell you a secret. Can't tell anyone. Okay? We got a deal? Some of you are a little reluctant. So here, if you take the story construct, Adam and Eve are not normative birth experiences, right? From the earth. By the way, Adam and Eve are one, not Adam and then the Eve out of Adam. The Hebrew word that is mistranslated as rib means side, as in bifurcated, the sides are separated. No belly button. Cain is the first person, the text suggests, born with a belly button. I don't know whether it was an innie or outie, the text is silent on that. However, what is that point of, we begin our lives in water, yes? The overwhelming miracle of the transition from a life in water to a life in air reminds me of a story. It's a rabbinic tale that's been put in modern garb. Twins in the womb. And one of the twins is a believer that there's life after the womb. And the other twin is a skeptic. There is no life after the womb. And they argue endlessly. The believing twin says, you know, after the womb, we will eat through the mouth. Ridiculous. It's a well-known scientific fact. All nourishment comes through the umbilical cord. Not only that, well, after the womb, we'll breathe air. Air? Life is only possible in water. Just then there's an earthquake. Labor begins, of course. And as good storytelling requires, the believing twin is forced down the birth canal first, and the skeptic behind sees a great light and hears a cry. It's worse than I thought. It's not that there's no life after the womb. There's punishment after the womb. But back to the tale. The belly button, theoretically, is a reminder that you and I are awesome wonders filled with miracle that we take for granted. You're not out of my presence, Cain. I'm giving you a reminder. I'm presenting to all life a reminder of the overwhelming miracle of life. Makes some sense? My fingers have never left my hand. Okay, continuing. Cain then went away from before the Eternal and settled in the land of Nomads, east of Eden. Well, John Steinbeck gets his title of Brothers in Conflict from east of Eden. But a better translation. Cain left before the Eternal and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now, those of you who knew nursery rhymes, the land of Nod is what in nursery rhyme land? Sleep. Ironically, the Hebrew word Nod means restlessness. He settled in the land of restlessness. Now, 4 verses later, he's told he's going to be a ceaseless wanderer. Earlier, a ceaseless wanderer, right? 4 verses later, he settles in the land of restlessness. Now, I used to have, I'll be very modest, a prodigious memory. It's not as good as it used to be. So that, if I'm reading a book and 200 pages later, the author does an error from which he or she forgot in the oh my goodness, he forgot. 4 verses later is not an accident. There's intent. Because how can you be a ceaseless wanderer and settle in a place? Other than the obvious, very modern idea, the existential angst of being not fully comfortable in our own skin. Which, as far as I know, is part of the human condition. Ceaseless wanderer. He settles in the land of restlessness. Now here it gets even more outrageous. Cain then was intimate with his wife. Where'd she come from? With tongue firmly in cheek, a very handsome orangutan, please. She gave birth to Enoch. He became the founder of a city, and he named the city after his son Enoch, as in, I like to say, Enochville. The first city by the first murderer, by the first farmer, all of which makes perfect sense in the global telescoping of what the march of civilization is. And there it is right before you. In this one story teaching at minimum 2 things. Civilization has to wrestle always with violence and how to respond to it. And second, all murder is fratricide. It's killing of one's deepest brother or sister. That's got to be what it means. Otherwise, it's foolishness. And I think it's far too significant to dismiss it as foolishness. Okay, so that's an example of unpacking. Before we go on to the next challenge, questions, comments, alternative speeches. Thank you, David. No?
I liked that element, settle in the land.
Wait, a little louder.
To settle in the land of the restless, or in the land of restlessness, implies taking a permanent...
Can you hear him?
No.
Oprah Winfrey here. Oh, I won't let you hold it though.
I was simply saying to settle in the land of the restless, or in the land of restlessness as it was, implies taking a permanent position, and what you were saying is existential angst. Right? To actually make a place home that is defined by not being home.
I think that's the human condition very, very often. So if you promise... to settle in the land of restlessness is the existential situation of never being at home.
Yeah, or making home of a place that can't be home.
Making home of a place that can't be home. But I'm going to, if you promise, if any of you come to the lecture that I'm hoping to give on miracles of the ordinary, I'm going to suggest this. Pretend you're only hearing it for the first time then, okay? My cliche around this is the following. I am much more than I ever thought I would be, and much less than I should be, and both statements are true. Wisdom The challenge is, how can I embrace the fact that both statements are true? Most of us just always spend, it's either one or the other. And that causes the endless turmoil within, the exile from ourselves. Do you know the name Dr. Carl Rogers?
Oh, yeah.
Humanistic psychology, one of the great pioneers of 20th century psychology. Here's his statement. It is a curious paradox that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change. Now, of course, the hard part is to accept oneself as he or she is, right? That's probably our life's work, actually. Okay, so, any other, yes, please.
I was struck when you talked about the navel.
Yeah, he's struck by his navel.
No, it's your navel. That he marked him so no one would kill him, and the idea that maybe that would protect him. He realized there were other humans who recognized he was human and not kill him. That was a hope, but I'm guessing God didn't really believe that.
You know, I thought for a moment you were going to go with the bare midriff. Now, I think that the point is intriguing. How would anyone know he had a belly button? My suspicion is that it's not, we don't just go around, unless you're a sociopath, deciding to murder people, right? It is rather the notion that I am connected. I'm never not connected to the source of life, even as I experience myself as separate and apart. Okay. As I was driving on the Will Rogers Highway, I don't know why this popped into my head. I'm sorry, but here it is. Guy stops to pitch up a hitchhiker. I guess it was when I saw the sign, hitchhiker may be an escaped criminal or something, an escaped prisoner. Yeah. That's the first time I've ever seen that particular sign. And immediately popped into my head, you know, guy stops to pick up a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker says to the driver, you know, I really appreciate you picking him up. You know, what's the possibility? It might be a mass murderer. And that driver says, nonsense. What's the odds of 2 mass murderers in the same? Okay. Let's do one at table, and then we'll all come together. I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 28. Come together. Actually, I'm going to change my mind. Actually, I'm not going to change my mind. Chapter 28 begins with verse 10. And I would like you to do the following for me. Read to yourselves 28:10 through 22, the end of the chapter. And when you're done, put your heads down on the desk. and then I'm going to ask them for, as you're reading it, challenges, problems, peculiarities in the text that come to mind. I'm going to ask at table discussions for you to unpack some of that, and then we'll come together with what you guys may have found in terms of challenges in the text. Fair? Okay. You're really reading it from your phone, aren't you?
Try to get your Bible.
They're gonna fix it. We all set? So spend a couple of moments. It's 10:42 if that's right. How about at 10:46 we come back together? Just identifying what you think are some challenges in this story, okay? Somebody make a list, checking it twice, find out if anybody's nice. And report back with thank you.
The city was known as Lux first. So he named it Bethel, but before that it was known as Lux or Lux. Did this guy come and conquer a town and say, you know what, I had a great dream. Yeah. This town is mine now. Because I had some great dreams. I'm like, Eddie Izzard's stuff. Like, no flag, no country. Did you watch Eddie Izzard?
I haven't, but I know about it.
He's extreme. It's been, I don't know, like 15 years since he did that skit. I don't know what he's like now, but it was, I think Killing Him Softly was the name of that. And he was, making fun of the colonial era. And he did a great degree in which the Yankees just call him everywhere. And different countries just sticking flags everywhere, saying, well, we own this now. Sounds fairly similar.
That's a challenging question.
It says, all the families of the earth shall be blessed, but then the little footnote says, or shall bless themselves. I'm like, well, that seems like it's different. If we're deciding what we're going to bless ourselves with, or if it's what God is blessing, it seems like it's hard to tell.
Maybe that kindness of free will extends to allowing us to choose to suffer.
Yeah.
Right? To reject blessing. Which is very good.
God is telling us.
In the belief that we can ever in such a way as to go to war. Yeah, I mean, we can't even decide what chooses. Right? Like 1 week short cheddar.
It's really silly contradiction, but why would you like, yes, I'm going to put a rock.
Okay, yes.
Like, world's worst pillow. Yeah.
He woke up and he took the rock away.
He's like, yes, I'm going to have some sort of prophecy with this rock.
It was a good rock.
Like, if you've ever been camping, the goal is to remove the rocks from underneath you before you sleep.
I don't think they have modern amenities, okay?
Then lay down in that place.
It induces vivid dreams.
Perhaps it's metaphorical. There was a sagebrush burning nearby.
I wasn't sure on verse 21. So that I return safely to my father's household. Back where he came from, or he's going to return to this
Yeah,
place?
I don't know about that. And then
They're mad about it too.
Ed and I have the same issues here.
Okay, tonight, everyone go home. Put a stone under your pillow.
Okay, folks, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we're going to get a whole bunch done, we got to get a whole bunch done, right? So, if by some chance one of the items you identified comes up before we get to your table, don't repeat it. Can we start in the very back?
Yeah. So one of the things that we identified that we just talked about was that it is interesting that God's promise is unconditional, and then Jacob places a condition on the unconditionality.
Nice. I have to leave now. Anything else? Anything else at the table? No?
We curious that I always got the feeling that he was alone on the journey, but then he renames the city. And so is he in a city? Where is he in a city? Does that also have meaning if he's outside of the city, outside of the community? What does that mean?
Okay. Great. Anything else?
What is the meaning of light?
Luz in Hebrew. By the way, it means light. And it was the name for a while of a solar energy company in Israel, not accidentally.
But I think that was also one of our questions.
Okay, what is Luz?
Yeah, or then why didn't he feel like all of a sudden he could start renaming things? He's like, okay.
Well, the text says he does.
Yeah.
And he names it Beit El, which means house of God, which is presumably the part of the unpacking of the story. Anything else?
That's correct.
Well, you guys get an A+. Challenge from the next table?
Okay.
Somebody do it.
Well, go ahead.
And that's
I didn't know Alphonse and Gaston lived here.
We were, excuse me. Oh, I get told it myself. This is only if I say something right. We were surprised that someone would want to use a stone for a pillow instead of using the cloak or something. And then the stone was not just a small stone, it was big enough to be a pillar and an altar to mark the place.
Oh, God, I should never have gone along with David on this stuff. Great.
So we were worried about that.
Okay.
And all the ifs, the conditions.
We got that one up there,
Yes, I
yeah.
know.
Yeah,
That-
yeah, good. Thank you. Next table.
The stone bothered us too.
I keep mine on.
We questioned, was it still a dream or did he really see it as he interpreted the action? And we questioned, is there really a gate to heaven? And then we talked about the stone, and we talked about the significance of the high place being heaven in so many interpretations.
That's a note for me, 161. Next. God, you guys got unpacked a lot of stuff here already.
We decided that Jacob had to be a lawyer because, God gives him this huge blessing that just is more expensive than any of us can contemplate. And the lawyer immediately begins negotiating. And I want bread to eat, and I want clothing to wear, and I want this, and I'm going to give you 1/10 of everything you're giving to me. If that's not negotiation, I don't know what it is.
Although, just a small aside, it's everything he's frightened about at the moment. Next table.
I think the only thing that we can possibly add is, well, some of us said, why did he have to lose? And then someone who knows the Bible said, well, because he was fleeing,
Yes.
and he had to keep running.
Yeah,
So,
as far as he knows, his brother wants to kill him.
right. So if that's the case, then why is God blessing him?
Okay.
The only additional one that I've got down is the notion that, let's see, where is it? You shall spread out to the east and the west. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants.
Okay. Go ahead.
I don't know who brought this up, but someone said, why give anything back to God?
Ooh.
And why negotiate? Why a tenth? In other words, why give it back to God? What would God need it for?
No, excuse me.
Well, I know about tithes. I wasn't going to.
No, it's just, in some ways you're absolutely right, except that if you're going to have an institutional focus. Somebody needs to support it. In fact, every religious tradition's got to find a way to sustain its professionals.
Stand there with a lawyer at the table.
Next one.
We also noticed that the dream was very specific, and we wondered at the significance of that.
Great. Anything else?
So the only thing we have to add that hasn't already been mentioned is we talked a lot about Jacob working out his own relationship with God and how we see that happening within our church and watching our children and youth grow and go to college and move on and how they are working out their relationships with God.
Great. Are we almost done?
I think it's all been said. You
All
can
been
go
said.
Thanks.
I want to add.
Can we trust you with the mic?
Probably. We talked about the oddity of them being like, and this place I name Bethel, which was previously named something else, but we're going to just move on very quickly. Taken right after, and your family will spread like dust across the land. It sounds very imperialistic.
Imperialistic?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he just took a rock and conquered a city. Right, this rock I slept on is now my tool and a pillar to heaven, and here you go, your town is mine.
We're also very interested in the detail of this dream. There are so many details. We're wondering if this is one of the first instances where God is talking to human directly.
Well, you've got the voice of God in the garden previously, although one of the exquisite things of the Hebrew is they heard the voice of God walking in the garden toward the evening, and the Hebrew is, and they hid. Now, the interesting thing is that the Hebrew is reflexive, which literally means they hid from themselves, which is provocative in the extreme, it would seem to me, in terms of what it really means to hide from God. More of that in the Miracles of the Ordinary talk. Okay, let's try to unpack some of this, and you gave me way more than we're going to get, because I thought this was going to be a real brief exercise, because I'm hoping that we'll have time, with your tolerance, to what I think unpack one of the most extraordinary pieces of the Hebrew Bible is you cannot see my face and live. And at the end of Moses' career, never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like unto Moses who knew God face to face. Now wait a second, what's going on here? Okay, let's go dream specific first, and we'll start. Well, 3 preliminaries. One of my great Bible professors used to say, is the Bible a great book because it's the religious text of Western civilization, or is it the religious text of Western civilization because it's a great book? And I would add a library of great books. And self-evidently, the church stands on the ground that it's a library of great books, which is why it is the foundation text for your tradition and mine, obviously. Second, especially in terms of Jacob and this bargaining thing, the Hebrew Bible, not the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible is filled with endless examples of flawed characters. I mean, if you want to talk about Genesis in terms of family dysfunction, oh my God! But here you go, there are examples. And Jacob, of the 3 patriarchs, the one we get the most suggestion of personality, is a conniving no-goodnik, right? Not models, only examples. And the third thing is, what would you make of a people who would preserve through history and convey to us today a book, and this is only part of, this is just the first 5 books, in which they are endlessly recording their failures to live up to their highest ideal. It's actually quite remarkable, and by the way, it has a remarkable contemporary ring. Forgive me for being political, but we don't want our children learning about slavery now, do we? Because they might find that it's embarrassing. as opposed to it's part of the core of the identity of the American experience. Not the only piece, but part of it. Aside, no additional charge. If any of you know the historian Jill Lepore, she's a Harvard historian, great writer, which is not usual for historians. She has an extraordinary book. I highly recommend it, even though it's like 900 pages long, but you can read it. It's called These Truths, A History of the United States. I think of myself as fairly knowledgeable about American history, but she has stuff in there that was totally unknown to me. And the battle in that book is the conflicting anchors of the racism that's at the source of our origins as a people, and the ideals embedded in, for instance, the Declaration of Independence, which we wrestle with back and forth, back and forth. That's the real American history, as opposed to those who don't want us to know the full panoply.
Would you repeat the name of the author?
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
I do not get any money from this. Jill Lepore, L-A-P-O-R-E. She's a frequent writer in the New Yorker, if anybody gets that and lets them pile up on the table. Okay, so let's do first dream specific. He goes out, he leaves, somebody pointed out, he flees. And he's heading to Haran, which is the ancestral homeland, because he's been told by one version of the story, go there to get a wife. And now, listen to the Hebrew for a moment. I want you to hear the word makom in one sentence. V'yifga b'makom, v'yelin sham kiva hashemesh, v'yikach avnei hamakom, v'yasem beroshata v'yishkav b'makom hahu. Makom is a word for place, but it's also one of the names in Jewish tradition for God. So what's nuanced here is he's coming out upon a place where he's going to learn something about God. Now, he may not learn anything about himself yet, but he's going to learn something about God. He comes upon this place because the sun is set. Well, gee, that seems unnecessary. But he's going to settle for the night. And he gathers up the stones. By the way, in many traditional cultures, you put your head on a hard surface. Those of you who've ever been to Japan, they don't use pillows. They use those things that support the neck in traditional Japanese sleeping arrangements, etc. Still, we have the notion of this. There's a Midrash that the stones fuse together to become a pillar. But it's possible, if you take the story in a certain, put a stone on top of stones and poured oil over it as a remembrance that this was a place that he now calls Beit El. It doesn't say he conquered a city, but that he calls House of God, even though its traditional name was Luz, at a time when this is being recorded, which is theoretically not at that very moment. Live and in, okay. Now, he spends the night there and he has a dream. And I'm always fascinated by dreams in terms of what we're told is that details can unlock the key to what the dream really means. If you're familiar at all with Freudian interpretation of dreams, Freud once suggested something to the effect of dreams are postcards from the unconscious. It would be a shame to send them back unanswered. So what's going on here? He has a dream, and Malchei Elohim Olim V'Yodim Bo. First of all, he has a dream and he sees, but everybody have the translation ladder? Yeah. We have no idea what that word, the word is sulam. It appears only once in the entire Hebrew Bible, so nobody really knows what it means. The best guess is not ladder, the best guess is ziggurat, which would be the ancient notion of going to a sacred place, right? And he has a dream, and in that dream, angels. The Hebrew word is malachim, malchei Elohim. Malach is the Hebrew word that means messenger. It doesn't mean angel. It means messenger. We get the word angel because the Greek translation used the Greek word for messenger. Guess what that word is? Angelos. Los Angeles. We get the English word angel, and we automatically leap to winged messengers from a heavenly realm, as opposed to the notion what is a messenger and what isn't a messenger. Or as one of my great teachers, Abraham Joshua Heschel, once suggested, are we perhaps messengers who have forgotten our message? Well, angels, let's get back to the message. The detail. He sees in his dream angels of God going up and coming down. Now here's where detail really matters. Shouldn't angels of God be going down and coming up? I mean, if you're taking it in the literal sense. So our tradition unpacks it in this way. I gotta stop using that word. I use it too much this morning. Our deeds give rise to messengers. We generate the angels. Not all of them, but it's our job too. Angels of God going up and coming down. Now here's where it gets perverse. The Hebrew. Verse 13. So let's look at what the English is. And lo, the Eternal stood up above it and said. Anybody got a different translation? And lo, the Eternal stood above it and said? Nowadays, a lot of people try to use eternal rather than Lord because of the shamanism, the masculine notion, as though deity had a sexual identity.
And did he stand? Is he a stander? He didn't sit?
No, it's just stand. The Hebrew is definitely stand. But the awkwardness is He Elohim Nitzav Alav. And God standing on it or him. Either one is utterly possible in terms of the Hebrew. Most commonly we think God standing at the top of the ladder, right? But much more provocatively, God standing on Jacob. Which is probably a good message for all of us. God does depend on us. How else is God going to get into the world if it isn't with what you and I do? Certainly, Jacob has much to learn in that category. Can you imagine one of the... Anybody know any Yiddish? The chutzpahdik? Ever heard the word chutzpah?
Yeah.
The outrageous claims of Jewish tradition is not only do human beings need God, but God needs human beings. To put it in another way, we're junior partners in the business, the lawyers around here, we're junior partners in the business of making a better world. And we ought to report for duty. In fact, aside, many languages have endless numbers of euphemisms for die. Kick the bucket, go on to glory, and on and on and on. There's only one euphemism in the Hebrew language for dead. It's niftar. It means to be discharged. Literally, we translate it departed. But it means to be discharged from service. In essence, that when you reach the discharge moment, somebody gives you an honorable discharge. Or at least, well done. So, we get to the promise, which is the continuity of Abraham gets this promise, people go in all directions, not imperialism, but being present in all places, and you'll be a blessing and all that kind of stuff. It's the Abraham blessing, repeated to Isaac, and now entrusted to this not terribly trustworthy individual. Somebody talked about why him, This is the best I got. I'm thinking, remember Groucho Marx in the Oh God films? And somebody, a critic wrote, if I were God, I'd want to be, not Groucho Marx, George Burns. I'd want to be George Burns because his timing is so terrific, right? But when God is confronted with flawed choices, what is God going to do? Choose the child, he's an adult, who despises the birthright so much that he'll barter it away for some lentils, or choose the young man who will do almost anything to get it, including engage in a conspiracy with his mother and his father to deprive their older brother. God's confronted with imperfect vehicles. So the suggestion, choose the one who cares too much rather than cares too little. And for me, in terms of my life, I always want to be guilty of having cared too much. I can't determine outcomes or results, but I can at least live with myself if I know that I cared too much even though I failed. That's how I make ethical decisions when I don't know what to do. What's the version that means I cared too much rather than too little? Anyway, he wakes up, right? The Hebrew, he's waking from his sleep. Vayikatz, he woke up and startled from his slumber, from his lifelong slumber, and he said, "This is nothing less than bamakom hazeh, the place where God is. Va'anochi lo yadati." Now, I wish I knew Hebrew. The normal word for I in Hebrew is ani. The unusual word for Hebrew is anochi. It's almost like if the queen speaking we. I, royal I, didn't know it. This is nothing less than God's place, and my anochi got in the way. My I-ness, my ego-ness. You know, when we're in these containers, we experience ourselves as separate and apart, right? Whereas, image from Jewish mystical tradition. If you assume the only thing there is ocean, all there is ocean. There are waves on the ocean, right? Waves are part of the ocean before they are, while they are, and when they no longer are. They've never been not part of the ocean. You and I are those waves. Right now, there's a wave on the ocean called Michael and every one of us, right? While we're in the form of waves, we think of ourselves as distinct, unique, and separated. But if we would realize that, first of all, we're never apart from the source. And we're connected to all the other waves. Those are my two jobs. And I constantly mess up on both of them. Constantly. Use that as you will. I think it opens some doors to perception that the anochi, the I-ness, gets in the way of. He was awestruck. And he said, this is nothing less than God. The hamakom hazeh is the house of God and the gateway to heaven. This insight is nothing less than the house of God and the gateway to the ethereal, eternal realm. He wakes up and he names the place where we go. In previous times it was known as another place. And then he makes this bargain, which is so fascinating because it is the origin notion of tithing. I do a radio show on Sunday mornings, and every so often we'll get a question about tithing. And the question will be, is it on gross or net? And I would say, if only that were the problem. But he comes to an understanding, but it's not his final understanding. If we had time and we look later in his life as he's leaving to go down to Egypt to be reunited with Joseph, he just celebrates the fact that God is with him. And maybe he's with God. No more bargaining, no more, here's a little bribe, no atheist in foxhole kind of thinking. He's grown. Now, to get ahead of ourselves a little bit, Jacob gets another name in this story, right? He becomes Israel. I sometimes say, if I had written the Hebrew Bible, it would have been better. I would have designed it so that only my group has a relationship with God. But the Bible, thank God, knows better than I do. Because you don't have to be a member of one particular club, according to the text over and over again, to have a connection to the Holy One. Second, if I had written the Bible, I would have made it a little more fairy tale-ish. That is to say, he becomes Israel. For the rest of his life, he should be Israel. Because now he's a new person, right? But again, the text is much more. Sometimes he's a Jacob, which can be understood in the Hebrew to mean crooked with God. Bent, not straight. And Yisrael, which can be straight with God. So aren't we all sort of Yaakov moments and Israel moments? Okay. I put 161 on the board for a particular reason. Because what's going on here in rabbinic tradition is distinctly impressive, I believe. Anybody ever heard the word gematria? Gematria is and I'm going to be very prejudiced here, a pseudoscience. That since letters have numerical equivalents, that you can unlock some secrets buried in a text by knowing the numbers. So, trust me, the gematria, the numerical equivalent for the Hebrew word sulam, is 161. The gematria, the numerical equivalent for the Hebrew word for Sinai, as in Mount Sinai, is guess what? 161. 161. So where was he, the Midrash would say? He's at Mount Sinai. Except there's a big problem if you take Sinai as a geographic. He's here on his way to here. Sinai is down here. So how could he be at Sinai if he's there, other than the notion that this is a poetic insistence that Sinai can be in anywhere that one is open to the presence of God, which is always and everywhere. But our eyes don't always see and our ears don't always hear. Okay. Let's see. Stone for Bill, still a dream, gain to heaven. Why God blessing him, bless yourselves by you. Why give to God? I think we did most of them, didn't we? Any residual concerns or pushback? Because I want to do the big one. Okay. Let's, well, I already took you to Deuteronomy, the end point where he saw God face to face. Now go to Exodus chapter 33, verse 12. Anybody need it? No, we don't have to. If you need to use the facilities, please use the facilities, but just realize that you're probably going to miss the single most brilliant thing I've ever said. Chapter 33. Beginning with verse 12. Now, first is context. This is after the golden calf. And Moses, if you take it seriously, is now having his crisis of faith as opposed to the Israelites having his crisis of faith. Here's a person who in the tradition knows God more intimately, more fully than anybody else, and he doesn't know enough. He wants to know more. So, Moses said to the Eternal, see, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now if I have truly gained your favor, pray let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. In short, he wants to be confident that the reconciliation after the apostasy is on course. And he's throwing in the kitchen sink. Oh, by the way, don't forget, these people are your people. And God said, I will go in the lead and will lighten your burden. So he's gotten the answer to what he wanted, right? And he replied, unless you go in the lead, do not make us leave this place. But didn't I just say that? For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may distinguish your people and I from every people on the face of the earth? And the Eternal One said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and have singled out by name. It's like a little child. Do you really love me? Do you really love me? Do you really love me? He said, oh, let me go. But he keeps pushing. He said, oh, let me behold your presence. By the way, that word which is translated presence is kavod, kavodecha. Kavod, the most famous line is, holy, holy is the eternal of hosts. The wholeness of the whole earth is God's glory. Molo kol haaretz kavodo. Kavod, your glory. Kavod also means honor. It also means presence. It also means fullness. It also means heaviness. It comes from the Hebrew word for liver. The liver is the heaviest organ in the body. The fullness of the whole earth is God's heaviness, God's presence. All was lacking is our awareness. At any rate, he wants to know. Let's keep going. And God answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the unique name, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and the grace that I grant, the compassion that I show. Continuing, but you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. By the way, another way of translating it, you cannot see all, you cannot experience all of God and survive, or while you are alive. By the way, we can't see, because remember the containers get in the way. And the Eternal said, see, there's a place near me, station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes, as my heaviness passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand, metaphor, until I pass by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. So, we can see God's back. Now, we're dealing with anthropomorphic stuff here. What could it possibly mean to see God's back? Presumably, we recognize the difference that the sacred has made after the fact. Is that not true? By the way, if we recognize the presence of the holy while we're in it, we might well be not in life. Because, well, there's a remarkable, one of the traditional interpretive tools of rabbinic tradition is there are no unnecessary words. I mentioned that. So if it seems unnecessary, there's a lesson there. So in a bit, Moses is going to be instructed, go up to the top of the mountain and be there. Why does he have to be told to be there? If he's going up on the top of the mountain, where else would he be? And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you are worried about, what am I going to have for lunch? Some of you are worried about what happened yesterday. Some of you are worried about what tomorrow. And some of us are present at the moment, right? But hardly any of us is ever fully present in any moment. We're worried or concerned or imagining or predicting, or, oh, my calendar is so full. How am I going to get to work? Go up to the top of the mountain and be there. Be present. Then we might see what it means to understand more of the full presence of holiness. Anyway, this episode contradicts precisely with what we've just been told at the end of Moses' life, right? By the way, unpack that one more time. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like unto Moses, who knew God face to face. Two asides. One, the text unpacks, never again did there arise in Israel. Sure, in Israel, but in the nations of the world, absolutely. Because we don't have a monopoly on God. None of us has a monopoly on God. Small aside in terms of one of the concepts that's gotten us in deep doo-doo in terms of understanding, chosen people, right? Doesn't mean you or I are better than anyone else. It means we're called to be better than we are. Others can join that claim. So, for example, in Exodus, you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy people. I am grateful beyond words that it doesn't say you shall be the kingdom of priests and the holy people. You shall be a kingdom, a holy people. Others can and should and are called to be. Or Isaiah puts it, you shall be an or lagoyim, a light to the nations. Not the, but a. Let's get to work. Let's get to work. By the way, the only time in which chosen means something about self as opposed to chosen, therefore I can do something to you. We're in land that used to belong to the Indians, right? They had to get out of the way because we were chosen by God to bring the blessings from liberty from sea to shining sea. And get out of the way. Or we'll get you out of the way. Sorry. So let's try to figure out, how is it possible for Moses to see God's face when the text seems to say you can't see God's face? I thought you should turn to Genesis chapter 32, verse 23. We're going to meet our good friend Jacob again. Another peculiarity of Jewish interpretation of sacred literature. It's a beautiful phrase in Hebrew. Ein mukdam u'me'achar v'migrad. So again, for the rusty ones about Hebrew, there is no early or late in the Hebrew Bible. It's all one gestalt. You can go there, here, and draw connections between the whole thing. It's one panoply of remarkable joy that continues to yield insight. At least one hopes it does. I certainly believe it does. So, verse 23. That same night, Jacob knows his brother Esau is coming with 400 armed men to meet him, and they're going to encounter each other the next day. 400 armed men is an enormous retinue in them dark days. Might not have good intent in Esau's mind, would be a logical conclusion. But Jacob is still being a bit of Jacob. That same night, Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children, and crossed at the ford of the Jabbok River. After taking them across the stream, he sent across all that he owned. Now, he's such a monster. Jacob sends across his family. The only defense they have is this little stream, right? He sends across his family, and then he sends across his possessions. Wouldn't it make more sense to send across your possessions and then your family if you're going to do it at all? Not a nice guy. Jacob is left alone, then says. So I interpret that to mean, the text is unclear. I interpret that to mean his family is on the other side of the river where they're defenseless. His possessions are on the other side of the river where they're defenseless. He remains in somewhat safer ground. Now, no doubt he rationalized, he's only coming after me. He and his 400 armed men won't do anything to the women and children or the possessions. But he's left alone, and that same night, let's see what a man wrestled with him until the rise of dawn. Now, it's very important. The Hebrew word is ish, without ambiguity at all. A person wrestled with him. When the man saw that he could not overcome him, he struck Jacob's hip socket so that Jacob's hip socket was wrenched as the man wrestled with him. In short, they're engaged in a wrestling match that is not yet decisive, and the adversary resorts to an illegal hold. Oklahoma State may not win the Big 12 wrestling championship this year. I just read that in this morning's paper. I'd be shocked if they don't. Then he said, the adversary, "Let me go, dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "Lo ashalecha ki im beirachatani." I will not let you go, it says unless, but until you bless me. I didn't want this to happen, but I won't let go of it until a blessing comes out of it. That's a very instructive formula for just about any and everything that happens in our lives, isn't it? Especially the moments that we don't wish to encounter. There's a dark side in every blessing. And is it possible that there's a blessing in every, what I'll call, literally, curse? I will not let you go until you bless me. So now, no. The other said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Yaakov." And he said, "Jacob. No more shall you be called Jacob, but Israel," said the other, "for you have struggled with God and with human beings, and you have prevailed." Anybody got a different translation? You've struggled with, does anybody have beings divine? Anybody else? Does everybody have God?
Striven with God.
Yeah, okay. Good. A little older English. Yeah. Many translations put in beings divine because they think there's a terrible possibility of heresy. You've wrestled with God and with people, and then everybody have prevailed? That is awful. The Hebrew word is batuchal, and it means you are competent, you are capable. You wrestle with God, and you wrestle with people, and that is your key core competency. Anybody know the name Isaac Bashevis Singer? Nobel Prize winning author, etc., etc. He once said, "A Jew is someone who can't sleep and won't let others sleep either." Wrestling. Don't we all just want peace of mind? Don't we all want it to be nice and calm, still waters? Life is turmoil. The only question is, will we report for duty, and how will we respond to the turmoil? So, you have wrestled. Yisrael, ki, sariti. Again, assonance, just like Cain, kaniti. Yisrael, ki, sarita, im Elohim, ve'im anashim v'tuchal. Because you've wrestled with God and with people, and you are competent, you are capable. Back to the text. And Jacob asked and said, "Tell me please your name." And he said, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. I love it. "Why do you ask my name?" is a very unusual name, right? He doesn't get an answer to that question. And Jacob named the place Peniel, because I saw God face to face, and I survived. Now, the text began quite clearly. He wrestled with a man. And the thing he wrenches from that encounter is he is Israel because he wrestles with God and with people, and he is competent. So which is it? Did he wrestle with God or did he wrestle with a man? The answer is yes. It's the only possible answer. At least if one's going to take... Now, Peniel, face of God. One of the beautiful things of the Hebrew language is the word for face is panim, and then Peniel is face of. Panim is in the plural form, which is to say, who has a face? We all have faces, more than one for each of us, and endless numbers out there for all of us, right? Faces of God. Who doesn't see the face of God? And now, because I saw God over it. The sun shone on him as he was leaving Penuel, just another way of saying the same thing, face of God. And he was limping on account of his thigh. So Jacob emerges from this encounter, more appropriately, from his life's experience, either metaphorically and or literally, limping for the rest of his life. And is that not true of all of us in terms of the pains and sorrows we encounter? We're all broken vessels. The rabbinic tradition, there's nothing so whole as a broken heart. And only people who've had their hearts broken know what can be the truth within that. So, now here's this add-on. To this day, that is why the people of Israel do not eat the thigh muscle that is in the socket of the hip, because he struck Jacob's hip with his hip socket at the thigh muscle. Anybody know the English language literature word bathos? Bathos means a drop. As in English, there was a terrible accident on the Will Rogers. 20 people died, 30 more were injured, and I had a hangnail. That's bathos. While I escaped with a hangnail, and then increasing intensity. Okay? The whole reason for this story, according to this add-on, is to understand why we don't eat sirloin steak. It's a hiding of a deeper meaning that the face of God is right before you, right next to you, and in you. For he wrestled with a human being. Let's get the clincher of that right now. Go to chapter 33, verse 10. Ready? Jacob said, He's met Esau. Esau has embraced him. Please, if I have truly found favor in your sight, take the offering from my hand, for to see your face, Kirot Pnei Elohim, not like seeing, is equivalent to seeing God's face, and you have accepted me. You have taken me in. You have shown me favor. I can't imagine anything more clear than what I would understand as the biblical tradition's insistence. There's no such thing as secular humanism. It's sacred. All of it and every part of it. What we do to each other, we do to the ultimate, to the infinite, to use the traditional Western word, God. We bring God into the world, or we drive God out. We bring God into our awareness, or we walk sightless in the face of miracles. It's got to be what's going on here. So, another way of putting it, in the creation story, as you know, human beings are created distinctly with something remarkable, with Tselem Elohim, translated image of God, in them. Anybody give me some synonyms for image?
Picture.
Picture, okay. Portrait.
Essence.
Essence? Oh, you're a philosopher in the room, huh? Icon? Wonderful. Planted. Image normally means idol. And if you know anything about the Hebrew Bible, it seems more often than not to be more iconoclastic, more against idols than for God. But the only time the word Tselem is used positively is about you and me. We are created with image, picture, portrait, icon, whatever you want, of God in us. By the way, it's the modern Hebrew word for a photograph. You want to see a photo of God? I'll show you my light driver's license. To be serious, each of us is a chance to get close to the Holy One. And what do? We yawn. That would be the least worst thing we do. But occasionally, we recognize that 1 + 1 really is more than 2. And more than 2, and more than, and on and on and on. It's an exquisite recognition that every human being is of infinite value. Every human being. What else could it possibly mean? By the way, we'll look at that in greater detail in the talk on miracles of the ordinary, because it comes in the context of a revolutionary idea, and it still is a revolutionary idea. That's for sure. Okay, before we go on to the opportunity for one more, any questions, comments, or pushback?
Just that last point you were making reminds me of what you said earlier about hiding from the voice of God in the Garden of Eden.
The last point reminds me of...
The last point you made reminded me of what you said earlier about hiding from the voice of God in the Garden of Eden. And it makes one wonder if perhaps the garden never left. But the awareness did.
That's very, very provocative. And a small aside. We're in the Lenten season, yes? By the way, do you guys do the give up something thing?
Some do, some don't.
We're also in the season leading up to the Jewish festival of Purim, which is sort of like a Mardi Gras-ish idea. And the sages in Jewish tradition push back against Purim. They didn't like the raucousness of it. They're always killjoys, right? That's our job. I forget who did it, but the definition of a Puritan is someone somewhere who is upset that someone might be having a good time. They need to come up with a biblical basis for the story of Purim. Because as you may also know, the scroll of Esther it's the only book in the Hebrew Bible where God the name God of any of its variations does not appear. Very, very provocative. Someday they invite me back, we'll do the scroll of Esther. But, so they find it in Deuteronomy, the biblical notion, Ki hastir ester panecha. For I shall surely, is God speaking in the according to the text, I shall surely hide my face on that day. Now, I shall hide my face. Why would someone hide? Come on, why would someone hide? Shame is one option, absolutely.
Fear.
And if I were God, I might have a lot to be ashamed of.
Fear.
Fear? Oh, unpack that a little more.
Well, God can see right through you. He knows when you've been bad and what you've done, and you don't want to.
No, but I'm God hiding. Why would God hide? I understand why you and I would hide.
To protect.
To protect.
Well, I'm just imagining.
Louder!
If the sun was a little closer to us, we wouldn't be alive.
Ah.
Right?
So the full presence of God needs to be hidden from us so that we can have room.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Do not see my face.
Maybe he's so. This is anthropomorphizing God.
Well, that's we're stuck with language.
Okay. Maybe he's so upset by what we've done, he can't face us right now because he might overreact.
Well, that's very interesting. I need to step back because if I were present, we're talking Noah time. What's the? It's something time. It's
Miller time.
Miller time. Okay. If only it were that bad. Any other reasons why someone would hide? Yeah, please.
Because of his identity, because if he becomes something we see, but by not seeing him, he can be in all of us.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Put that one for a sermon later when you forget it. Yes, please.
To be alone.
I just want to be alone. Now,
It could be a game.
wait, before we... You know, in the New Testament, when Jesus is challenged with, what's this, the greatest commandment? Anybody remember what he says?
Love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul. Love your neighbor.
First, doesn't he say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." And the second is unto these, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Yes, isn't that what, am I? Yeah. You know, what's the correct? David, I need you. What's the correct?
I think he skips that first part of Deuteronomy and just says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength."
Okay. Never mind. But the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is," the last word is echad, one. And of course, endless debates, one, not three. And of course, you know, as an outsider to your tradition, I understand the Trinity to be the way you understand the monotheism at the heart of deity, the unity at the heart of deity, even though it's not my tradition, obviously. But the word echad, which is one, can also mean singular, as in, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The only thing there is God. God alone." But that would be alone in the sense that all of us are expressions of, rather than God is separate and apart from. I'm going to offer one other suggestion for why God might hide. It's the same reason as why a child hides. They want to be found. I'm hiding in the closet. To me, that's the most vital sense of, I often forget to look, but occasionally I'm present. And then it's, the bush burns unconsumed. And I was aware of it, briefly. I mean, I'm not Moses, that's for sure, but briefly. So, any other questions? Yeah, please.
I was thinking when you were talking about...
I'm glad you were thinking.
About not seeing the face of God, it reminded me of John Wesley's prevenient grace. That it's always there. We're always figuring it out after it's already been in the past. So we're always looking on the backside
Yeah, for sure. My favorite John Wesley is the preacher must be on fire, for then people will come to see him burn. Yeah, but just as an aside, I think it's one of the reasons why ministers are experiencing a lot of burnout. I'm sorry, I apologize. I didn't say it. Anybody remember the name David Niven? The actor? Yeah. In his memoir, autobiography, by the way, he was a notorious rake. That's a nice word for he was a sexual predator. Thank you. He's at a party in Beverly Hills, and there are two women at the top of a stairway, and he's standing next to a gentleman, and he says to the gentleman, "That is the ugliest woman I've ever seen." And the gentleman says, "That, sir, is my wife. I meant the other one. That, sir, is my daughter." Oh. I didn't say it. And that was his response. I didn't say it. So I didn't say the burnout thing. But one of the things that I think is critical to elaborating on the Wesley line is the congregation must be on fire. The minister lights a spontaneous combustion that goes beyond him or herself. And I'm glad that in your tradition you can say, or herself. So, any other things? Because we've got enough moments, I think, to do one more. Okay. Turn to Genesis chapter 27. 27. Verse 1. Now, unfortunately, because of time, we're not going to really do justice to all of this. But we're going to try to do some. When Isaac had grown old and his eyesight had dimmed, he called his elder son Esau, saying to him, "My son, here I am." He answered, "Look now," said he, "I have grown old, and for all I know, I may die any day. So pick up your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the countryside and hunt me some game. Then you can make me tasty dishes such as I like, and bring them to me, and I will eat so that I can give you my heartfelt blessing before I die." As Isaac was speaking to his son Esau, Rebekah was listening, and when Esau went to the countryside to hunt for some game to bring him, Rebekah said this to her son Jacob, "Look, I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me game and make me tasty dishes, that I may eat and then bless you before the Eternal, before my death.' Now, son, listen to me, do what I am instructing you." Rebekah is one heck of a manager and manipulator. By the way, with an extraordinarily passive husband. Yeah. "Go to the flock and bring me 2 tender kids," that's goats, "and I will make them into tasty dishes for your father, such as he likes. You will bring them to your father, and he'll eat so that he may bless you before his death." But Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, "Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Should my father feel me, I will seem to him like a cheat, and I will bring a curse on myself, not a blessing." Notice he's not worried about the ethical implications. He's just worried about, I could get in trouble here. Okay. Good old Jacob. His mother then said to him, "Any curse that you get will be on me, my son. Just listen to me and go get them for me." Where does she come up with this? He curses you, I'll take it. Just do what I say. Yes, Mom. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made tasty dishes such as his father liked. Rebekah now took the finest of his elder son Esau's garments that she had in the house and dressed up her younger son Jacob. The skins of the kids she wrapped up in his hands and over the smooth part of his neck, and she put the tasty food and the bread that she had made into her son Jacob's hand. This is one heck of a conspiracy going on here, right? Going then to his father, he said, "Father," and he replied, "Here I am. Which son of mine are you?" Now, Jacob has limited vision, but he's not dim-witted in the slightest. His son says, in the initial relation, "Here I am," and he immediately knows it's Esau. Now, he has some suspicions, which I think means that the whole thing that's going on here is the conspiracy of 3 against 1, so that Isaac can have plausible deniability. Which of my sons are you? And now it gets even more remarkable. "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Pray, get up and eat. Sit and eat at my game so that you can give me your heartfelt blessing." Isaac then said to his son, "How is it that you were able to find game so quickly, my son? What big eyes you have." And he replied, the eternal your God made it happen for me. By the way, rabbinic tradition, this is a dead giveaway that it couldn't be Esau. It's got to be Jacob who's invoking deity. I mean, Esau would never do that sort of thing. He's a hunter. And the hunt is all that matters. But notice the suspicion. How in the world were you so successful so quickly? Pray come near me, said I. He's still suspicious, right? Or still needs some basis to continue. So that I can feel you, son. Are you really my son Esau? Or are you not? Now, he only has two, so those are the options, right? Jacob approached his father Isaac, who said to him, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. How come he did not recognize him? How? Because his hands were hairy like the hands of his brother Esau, and as he was preparing to bless him, he said, are you really my son Esau? Still suspicious. I am. Now, by the way, Esau must have been one heck of a hairy fellow. Goat skin. Again, it's trick galore that Isaac is in on, or you're dealing with a fairy tale. And I don't think it's a fairy tale whatsoever. He said, I am. He answered, bring near me and I will eat at my son's games till I can give you my heartfelt blessing. He brought it to him and he ate and drank and he brought him wine and drink. His father Isaac then said to him, pray come near and kiss me, my son. As he came near and kissed him, he smelled the scent of his clothes and blessed him. We need to skip the blessing. It's a property blessing because there's two issues going on in the text that often get confused. One is the firstborn's share of inheritance. The other is who will continue the promise of Abraham. That's the separation that gets many people confused in terms of understanding what's going on here. By the way, in the ancient world, a father didn't have to go the way Deuteronomy says the firstborn gets a double portion. Father could pick which one. Now, I suspect that one of the things the text is alluding to is Isaac knows his less favored son is the one who needs to continue with the greater quality and quantity in order for the story to continue. But he doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to tell his more loved son, I love you, but this story goes with your brother, not with you. It's hard, isn't it? All of us who are parents know that awkwardness, that difficulty. So, just as Isaac finished blessing Jacob, as the very moment that Jacob was in the act of leaving his father, his brother Esau came in from a hunt. There's no moment where all the characters come together. It's brief encounters, 2-on-2, over and over again. Almost soap opera-ish in its construct. But there's a wonderful book I recommend it highly called Certain People of the Book by Maurice Samuel. Despite the awkward language written in the 50s, it's about the minor characters in the Hebrew Bible. And one of the things he says is the two greatest miracles in the Hebrew Bible are to make goat taste like venison and for goat skin to make a person think it's a human being. Two greatest miracles. You know, he's got his tongue firmly in cheek, even as the text seems to have some of that going on. He bought the food, let my father get ready to eat at some of his son games so he can give me your heartfelt blessing. I gotta eat again. But his father Isaac said to him, who are you? So he replied, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Isaac now began to shudder, a shudder exceedingly great. Oh yeah, right. And he said, who then hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate of it all before you came? I blessed him, and blessed he who will remain. There's another cop. What's blessed and blessed he shall remain? Other than he needs to say, I could undo it, but I'm not going to. I could undo it, but I can't tell you that because this story is going away from you with your younger brother. When Esau heard his father's words, he broke into an exceeding loud and bitter howl and said to his father, bless me too, father. But he said, your brother came with deceit, took away your blessing. We're going to have to skip. Is that why he's named Jacob? Blah, 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 blah. 38. This is, first of all, the notion that Esau, who becomes the embodiment of Rome in rabbinic tradition, the classical enemy, is portrayed with such humanity is somewhat sui generis, with the possible exception of the Iliad and the Troy Greek personality portraits. I love this line. Do you have but one blessed father? Said Esau, bless me too, father. And Esau cried out and wept. His father Isaac then responded and said to him, by the way, pretty similar blessing. You're going to have prosperity, and you're going to break away ultimately from your sons, your younger brother's hegemony over you. And then the grudge that leads to what we unpacked in terms of the dream episode, etc. It's 11:52. Anybody want to inquire, worry, etc., about what we've done with this one? Anybody got the second question? Please.
Well, I think that your referral to...
I think that your referral to...
I think your referral to the scriptures highlighting these very fallen people is inspirational because we are fallen. And so I don't believe that our faith would be for real if it was all these perfect people that never had problems, that were never inferior, that were never failures, because we can identify, and that's what makes our faith very real.
I certainly would agree with that statement. In fact, a personal episode. Very modestly, I was very successful very early. I was the head of what was then a 1,400 family congregation, which I grew to 1,900 families at age 27. That's not supposed to happen, which is one of the reasons why I retired for the first time at age 55. But I had been a rabbi maybe 2 or 3 years, and I was thinking of quitting. What kind of crazy job is this? Congregation's never going to do all you want them to do. You're never going to get a chance to do all you want to achieve. I was thinking of quitting, and I was sharing this with an older colleague who said to me, what makes you think you should be a better failure than Moses? That was liberating. It's not about success or failure. It is about, to quote, I'll admit this, not one of my most favorite people, Saint Mother Teresa. I was not called to be successful, I was called to be faithful. By the way, called to be. Once in a while we should answer the call. Because we are broken instruments. Story. A king has, as his most precious possession, a beautiful diamond. One day he discovers that the diamond has got a terrible scratch on it. He's inconsolable. He offers an incredible reward to anyone who will restore the diamond to its original finish. Incredible reward? Plenty of people line up to try. Now you know, of course, they all fail. Otherwise, I don't have the rest of the story. And finally, an older man comes forward and says, I will make the diamond even more beautiful than it was before. Nothing to lose. Go ahead. So he uses the scar, the scratch on the diamond, as a stem for a rose that he carves on the diamond. And it is more beautiful than it ever was before. Ralph Waldo Emerson supposedly said, God never made anything that didn't have a crack in it. Leonard Cohen, the Canadian poet, came along and said, in response to Ralph Waldo Emerson, that's all right. That's how the light gets in. But I would add, I wish he'd said, that's all right. That's how the light gets out. Because it's in and out that makes us the best version of who we are. There's a Martin Buber comment that if he were alive today would say the way I'm going to say it. We become what we are, children of God, by becoming what we are, brothers, parentheses, and sisters of each other. No wonder God ideas are in trouble, because we have trouble with the second part, being brothers and sisters of each other, don't we? Yes, please.
This time.
Run!
I just want to say this time together with you has been far too brief.
Oh, well, thank you very much. There's more time. I hope you can say that after the other times. thank you all. It's been a delight for me to work with you, and thanks for the pushback and the input, and just the chance to share. Really. Blessings.